Leningrad. The spring of the year 1967. A major of the militia is sitting on the floor of his apartment. Photographs are scattered around him. His hands are trembling so hard that he cannot pick them up. He looks at these pictures and begins to cry, at first quietly, sobbing, then louder, and then he wails aloud, like a child, clutching his head in his hands and rocking back and forth. This man is the city's best investigator. For 12 years he investigated the most notorious case in the history of post-war Leningrad. 17 women found dead in parks. On each one, a note with verses. The city called the killer the Night Strangler, and Major Grigorie Antipov swore to find him, and now he had found him. But what he saw in those photographs, what he understood in that second, shattered his consciousness into pieces. Because the truth turned out to be so monstrous, so impossible, that even now, telling this story, it is hard to believe. 12 years of hunting, 12 years of searching, and when he finally learned the killer's name, he couldn't take it. He broke. He cried as he hadn't cried even in the winter of the blockade in the year 1942. Who did he see in those photographs? What truth made him cry like that? And why, after this discovery, did another victim appear? The 17th, the last one. To understand this, we must go back. The autumn of the year 1955, when everything was just beginning, when Leningrad still believed the worst was over. On October 19, 1955, the body of a young woman was found in the Tauride garden. The university student Pavel Sokolov was returning through the park around 9:30 in the evening. He was rushing to meet his fiancée. He had taken a shortcut. The fog was so thick that visibility was no more than 3 meters. Pavel was almost running down the alley and he tripped. At first he thought it was a tree root. He bent down to look into the fog and saw a woman's hand. The scene discovered by the militia patrol that arrived at the location haunted the dreams of even the experienced officers for a long time. The girl, about 20 years old, was lying under an old chestnut tree, on her back, her hands stretched alongside her body, her light-colored dress carefully arranged, her hair pushed away from her face. An almost peaceful image, were it not for the eyes. Wide open, with small hemorrhages on the whites of her eyes and the neck. Blue, almost black finger marks covered her neck. The medical examiner later determined the neck was squeezed with monstrous force, the hyoid bone broken, the laryngeal cartilages damaged. The victim died in at least 3 minutes. 3 endless minutes, while someone methodically strangled her, without loosening the grip even for a second. But the most horrifying was the detail discovered almost immediately. On the murdered woman's chest lay a small piece of paper, carefully folded and pressed down by a small, smooth stone. The officer on duty from the department unfolded it. It was verse, handwritten in a uniform, calligraphic script, as if a diligent student had traced the lines in a calligraphy notebook. In the white fog, the light melts. Your last sigh, my greeting. Fall asleep, my love. Fall asleep, in the arms of eternal silence. Sergeant Major Boris Kovalyov, who had worked for 8 years in the Criminal Investigation Department, later told his colleagues. When he read those lines, a cold chill ran down his spine. Not because of the content, but because of the way it was written. Carefully, tenderly, as if the killer were leaving a message for a beloved woman, as if he were saying goodbye. The head of the city directorate of the Criminal Investigation Department, Colonel Semyon Drozdov, arrived at the crime scene. A massive man, with graying temples and the heavy gaze of a man who had seen too much in his life. He silently walked around the site, crouched down next to the body, looked at the note for a long time, then stood up and uttered a short word, which everyone heard, but no one recorded in the protocol. Sergeant Kovalyov memorized the colonel's expression, grim, almost resigned, as if Drozdov already knew that this was not the last victim, that it was only the beginning of something terrible. The victim was identified the next day. Vera Lebedeva, 26 years old, worked as a librarian at the Krupskaya District Library. She lived with her mother on Liteyny Boulevard. That evening she was returning from English classes, which she attended on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She usually took the tram to Smolny and walked from there. The Tauride garden was not part of her route. The investigators interrogated the mother. a woman of about 50, with a black headscarf. Her hands endlessly fidgeted with the edge of her apron. She spoke softly, monotonously, as if not fully aware of what was happening. Vera was the only daughter. A quiet, shy girl. She dreamed of getting into the faculty of philology. No admirers, no conflicts. She simply went to work, to classes, and back. She didn't linger in the evenings. Why was she in the terrorized garden that evening? It was a detour that added about 15 minutes to her journey. Her mother didn't know. The teacher from the English classes said that Vera left immediately after class, around 8 o'clock in the evening, meaning an hour and a half before she was found. The officers checked all her acquaintances, colleagues, neighbors. Not a single clue. Vera Lebedeva was one of those people about whom they say, quieter than water, lower than grass. She couldn't argue with anyone. She couldn't provoke anyone's hatred. And then the investigation remembered. This is not the first murder. On August 18th of the same year, the body of a young woman was discovered in the summer garden. Galina Novikova, 24 years old, a nurse at the district polyclinic, strangled. On her chest, a note with verses. At that time, they thought it was a domestic crime. They checked the husband, he was clean. They checked colleagues, former admirers. Nothing. The case remained pending, and even earlier, at the beginning of July, Ludmila Solovyova was found strangled in the Mikhailovsky garden. 32 years old, a primary school teacher. On her chest, a note with verses. At that time, they thought, jealousy, a family drama. Her husband was on shift at the factory, an ironclad alibi. Relatives, enemies were not found. The case was also closed as unsolved. Now, after the third murder, it became clear. It is not a coincidence. It is a system. 3 women, all young, between 24 and 32 years old, all strangled with bare hands, with monstrous force. All found in parks, late in the evening or at night. On all of them, notes with verses, written in the same handwriting. Colonel Drozdov convened an emergency meeting. In the office on the 3rd floor of the Directorate building on Gorokovaya Street, the city's best investigators gathered. The cigarette smoke was so thick that the people at the table could barely distinguish one another. Drozdov placed the files for the 3 cases on the table and said, "Comrades, we have a maniac operating in the city." The word hung suspended in the air. A maniac in Leningrad. In the year 55, 10 years after the victory, in a city that survived 900 days of blockade, that buried its dead and survived on its last strength. In a city that was rebuilding itself, believed in the future, rejoiced that the war was over. And now, a maniac, a killer who chooses his victims, strangles them and leaves notes, like in foreign detective novels, like in America or Europe, but not here, not in Soviet Leningrad. I need a man who will see this case through to the end, who will not give up, even if he has to work for 1 year, 2, 10 years. In the far corner of the office sat a man who had been silent all this time. Major Grigorie Antipov, 37 years old, tall, thin, with penetrating gray eyes. His hair was already touched by an early grayness, the legacy of the blockade. He had deep wrinkles on his face, too deep for his age. Antipov stood up. "I will take this case, Comrade Colonel." The voice was calm, steady. Drozdov looked at him with a long, evaluating gaze. He knew Major Antipov. Phenomenal memory. He remembered details of cases 2 years old, could quote an interrogation protocol conducted half a year ago. Methodical, scrupulous, tireless. But most importantly, Antipov had the reputation of a man who sees cases through to the end. In 8 years of work, not a single unsolved murder. Not one. "Good," Drozdov nodded. "The case is yours, Major." Antipov took the files from the table. 3 crimes, 3 women, 3 notes. He did not yet know that this case would stretch on for 12 years, that it would destroy his family, his health, his sanity. He would become a hostage to this hunt, and he could not imagine at all how it would all end. But that would be later. For now it was a cold October evening in the year 1955. Major Antipov walks through nocturnal Leningrad with the files under his arm, returning home, where his wife Elena awaits him, where the light is burning in the window, where it smells of dinner and hearth warmth. He walks and thinks about the 3 dead women, about the verses left on their bodies, about the reason why a man can kill like this, methodically, neatly, almost tenderly. He does not yet know that the answer to this question lies much closer than he could imagine. But that will be later, 12 years later. But now, panic is starting in the city. But before continuing this story, we must understand who Grigorie Antipov is, because what will happen to him 12 years later has its roots in the past, deep in the past, in that winter which Leningrad will never forget. Grigorie was born in the year 1918, his father an engineer at the Kirov plant, his mother a German language teacher, a typical family of intellectuals, books, classical music in the evenings, disputes about literature over tea. Grigorie grew up a quiet, thoughtful boy, read voraciously, memorized entire pages of Pushkin and Lermontov by heart. His phenomenal memory manifested early. At 6 years old, he could retell the content of a book read a week earlier, with the exactness of the dialogues. At school, the teachers were amazed. Grigorie never wrote down his homework. He simply memorized and completed everything perfectly. In '39, he graduated from school with a gold medal. He was supposed to enter the university's faculty of history. He dreamed of becoming a scientist, of dealing with archives, of delving into the past. But then the war began. On June 22, 1941, Grigorie turned 23. He was a tall, sturdy young man, fit for military service. He should have been drafted in the first few days, but his father was not allowed to leave the factory. A defense enterprise, every engineer was highly valued, and Grigorie was left on the basis of exemption as the son of an irreplaceable specialist. The Antipov family met the war in Leningrad. His father worked at the factory 18 hours a day. His mother got a job as a nurse at the hospital. Grigorie volunteered for the fire brigade to extinguish incendiary bombs on the roofs during air raids. In the autumn of '41, the circle around the city closed. The blockade began. The first months they still held on. There were reserves, even if the rations were reduced. There was hope that they would break the blockade, that they would be liberated, that everything would end quickly. Grigorie stood guard on the roofs. Mother worked at the hospital to the point of exhaustion. Father repaired the tanks at the factory that left for the front and never returned. And then winter came. The winter between '41 and '42. Whoever did not live through the winter of the blockade will never understand what that means. It is impossible to explain in words. The cold that penetrates the bones, the lungs, the very heart, the hunger that devours a person from the inside, turns him into a shadow. The darkness, because the electricity was turned off. The silence, because people no longer had the strength to speak. Grigorie remembered that winter fragmented, in separate frames like a torn film reel. He remembered how his father left for the factory in December, hugged his mother, patted Grigorie on the shoulder, said, "Hold on, I'll be back in the evening." He never returned. He fell next to the lathe. His heart couldn't take it. He was 46 years old. He remembered how his mother stopped getting out of bed in January. She lay, covered with all the blankets in the apartment, and looked at the ceiling. She wasn't crying, just looking. Her lips moved. She was probably praying, although she had never been religious before. Grigorie would bring her his portion of bread, 125 grams a day. He would put it next to her pillow. She wouldn't eat. She would say, "You eat, son. You are young. You must live." He remembered the morning of January 23rd, a gray, cold sunrise. He approached his mother's bed and understood that she was no longer breathing. She lay peacefully, her hands clasped on her chest, her face serene, as if she had fallen asleep. She was 43 years old. And then, an abyss. Grigorie didn't remember the next 19 days at all, as if they had been cut out of his memory, that phenomenal memory that had never betrayed him. He only remembered separate moments, shards. He remembered a cold so strong it was impossible to breathe. The air cut the lungs. He remembered the hunger, not just the desire to eat, the hunger that filled his entire consciousness, left no room for any other thought. He remembered walking down the street and seeing corpses. They lay right on the sidewalks, covered in snow. Nobody picked them up. They couldn't manage. He remembered someone's screams, cries, prayers. He remembered sitting in a corner of the empty apartment and gnawing on something. What exactly? He didn't remember. He didn't want to remember. And then he came to. The middle of February. He was lying in the hospital. Next to him, a nurse, a young girl with a tired, kind face, was changing the bandage on his hand. Grigorie looked at his hand and didn't understand where the wound came from, deep from his wrist to his elbow, sewn with thick thread. He asked, "What happened?" The nurse answered softly, "They found you in the basement of an apartment building, unconscious. Your toes were frostbitten. We had to amputate 2. Your hand got infected. You almost got gangrene. You were lucky to be alive." Grigorie wanted to ask, "And what was I doing in the basement?" But he didn't ask because he feared the answer. He spent until March in the hospital. "You're recovering," the doctors said. "A young, strong organism. Despite the dystrophy, he will survive." When he was discharged, Grigorie returned to the empty apartment. His father was gone. His mother was gone. The furniture was partially dismantled for firewood. There was frost on the walls. He sat in the middle of the room and tried to remember those 19 days of void. He couldn't. In his memory, there was only darkness, emptiness, as if someone had torn those pages from the book of his life. Grigorie decided it was better this way. Some things are better left unremembered. Towards the summer of 42, it became a little easier. The road of life opened across Lake Ladoga. Products began to arrive. Grigorie got a job at the factory, in his father's place. He worked as a lathe operator, processing parts for shells. He lived from one shift to the next, without thinking about the past. The blockade was lifted in January 44. Grigorie was 25 years old. He looked 40. Gray hair, deep wrinkles, the empty gaze of a man who had survived hell. After the war, he didn't go to the university. He didn't want to deal with history. The past caused him pain. He applied to the militia school. He was accepted, educated, disciplined, with a phenomenal memory. Exactly the kind of people they needed. Grigorie proved to be a born investigator. He could study evidence for hours, interrogation protocols, establishing connections that others didn't notice. His memory worked like a file cabinet. It was enough to read a file once, and he would remember every detail. By the year 54, he had reached the rank of major. In 8 years of work, not a single unsolved murder. Colleagues respected Antipov. They called him the machine. They said, "He's not a man, he's a mechanism. He never makes mistakes, never gives up, never forgets." Grigorie didn't get upset. He knew that after the blockade, something had broken inside him. Emotions had become muted, distant. He could sympathize with the victims of crimes, but he didn't truly experience their pain. He could get angry at criminals, but he didn't hate them. He simply did his job, methodically, qualitatively, without unnecessary emotions. But the memory losses didn't start right away. The first few years after the war, they almost didn't exist, then rare episodes. An hour or two would disappear from memory. Antipov blamed fatigue, overwork. Everything is normal. He sometimes found notes in his planner that he didn't remember making. Strange phrases, the handwriting slightly different, but not completely foreign. He paid them no mind. He thought it was stress, overexertion, the brain defending itself. He didn't tell the doctors. He was afraid he would be suspended from work. In the year 1950, at the age of 32, Grigorie got married. His wife's name was Elena. She worked as an accountant at the Kirov plant. They met by chance. Grigorie was investigating a theft. Elena was helping him with the documents. A quiet, calm woman. She was 28 years old with a failed marriage behind her. Her husband had perished on the front in 43. They had no children. Grigorie didn't love her with that romantic love written about in books, but he felt at ease with her. She didn't demand sincerity, didn't ask questions about the past. She was simply there. It resembled comfort, what Grigorie had lost in the winter of 42. The first years of marriage were happy, as much as Grigorie was capable of happiness. They rented a room in a communal apartment in the Petrogradskaya district. In the evening, they listened to the radio. Elena knitted. Grigorie read work documents. Elena wanted children. Grigorie agreed, but somehow it didn't happen. He tried to be a good husband, brought home his salary, didn't drink, didn't cheat, helped around the house. Wasn't that enough? Elena would laugh and say, "It's enough. You are a good man, Grigory." A good man, Grigorie Antipov, major of the militia. That's exactly who he was in the autumn of '55, when he took on the case of the night strangler. He did not yet know that the memory losses would become deeper and deeper, that at night he would wake up in unknown places, that his wife would become afraid of him, that 12 years later he would be sitting on the floor of his apartment surrounded by photographs and crying. But all of this was yet to come. For now, it was the autumn of '55. The city still believed the worst was over, that the war had ended, that they could live on. But sometimes the war doesn't end. It lives inside those who survived and waits for its hour. The investigation began standard, by the book. Antipov took the 3 files, spread them on his desk. The crime scene investigation protocols, the victim's photographs, the medical examiner's conclusions, the lists of interrogated witnesses, and began to look for connections. The first thing that stood out: all 3 women did not know each other. They lived in different districts, worked in different fields: librarian, nurse, teacher. No common acquaintances, no intersection in their biographies. It means the killer was not choosing them for personal reasons. No revenge, no jealousy, no family drama. He chose them at random or according to a certain criterion that the investigation did not yet see. Second, all the crimes were in parks. The Torrid Garden, the Summer Garden, the Mikhailovsky Garden, the city center. Popular places. During the day there were many people. But in the evening, when it got dark, they were almost deserted. Antipov took out the map of Leningrad, marked the crime scenes with red crosses, and looked. All 3 parks were within a half-hour walk of each other. A compact district. It means the killer either lives here or works here. He knows the area, knows where he can remain unnoticed. Third, the notes. Antipov laid them out in front of him. 3 sheets of paper, the same handwriting, uniform, calligraphic, diligent. As if the man had learned to write beautifully and had practiced for years. The verses were simple, unpretentious, but they had a certain tenderness in them, a sadness, as if the killer did not rejoice in the victims' deaths, as if he mourned them. In the white fog the light melts. Fall asleep in the arms of the dark night. Rest I give you forever. Antipov read and reread, trying to understand what this meant, why he leaves notes, what he wants to say. Maniacs are usually divided into types. Some derive pleasure from the process of killing, from the power over the victim, from their fear. Others kill out of a mission. They believe they are cleansing the world of sinners, prostitutes, unfaithful wives. But this one seemed to be saying goodbye to the victims, as if wishing them rest, as if he loved them in a strange, sick way. Antipov noted in his planner: killer type, organized, plans the crime, chooses the locations, writes the notes beforehand, controls himself, possibly intelligent, educated, age between 30 and 50 years, physically strong man, judging by the nature of the injuries on the victims' necks. Then the interrogations began. Hundreds of interrogations. Antipov, together with the operative officers, combed the areas around the parks, questioned everyone who might have seen something. Residents of nearby houses, street sweepers, shop vendors, tram conductors, militiamen from their posts. Someone had seen suspicious people in the parks on those days. Someone had noticed oddities. The testimonies were gathered thread by thread. An old woman from a house across from the Torrid Garden. Yes, I saw a man that evening, tall, in a dark overcoat. He was standing near the park fence smoking. Then he went inside. I didn't see his face. It was foggy. The street sweeper from the summer garden. Yes, I was sweeping leaves that day. Towards evening I noticed a man on the far alley. He was walking slowly, as if waiting for someone, but I paid him no mind. Who knows who wanders around? The militiaman from the post, near the Mikhailovsky Garden. A man passed by me about 20 minutes before the body was found. He greeted me so politely. I even thought, how intelligent. I didn't remember his face. It was dark. 3 different witnesses, 3 different parks. And they all say roughly the same thing. A tall man, dark clothes, polite, discreet. A ghost in the fog. Antipov compiled a composite sketch, average, unclear. A middle-aged man, with an average appearance, thin, tall, with no special identifying features. There were hundreds of thousands of such men in Leningrad. The composite sketch was sent to all militia precincts, displayed in public places. They wrote a note in the newspaper, cautiously, without giving details. The militia is looking for a witness in the case of the murders in the city's parks. No reaction. Weeks, months passed. Autumn was replaced by winter. Antipov worked 12 hours a day, came home late, fell onto the bed exhausted. Elena would ask, "How's work?" He would answer, "I'm working," and he would leave again. He felt the case absorbing him, how thoughts of the killer filled his head. Even at night he had dreams. Foggy parks, silhouettes of women walking down alleys, and a shadow following them. He would wake up in a cold sweat, look into the darkness, and couldn't fall back asleep. Elena tried to talk to him. "Grigorie, you're killing yourself with this case. Maybe you should ask Drozdov to give it to someone else. You've already been working for a year without results. It's not your fault." Antipov looked at her and remained silent. How to explain to her? How to tell her that this case had become a part of himself? That he sees the faces of these women every night? That he hears their last sighs? 5 women, 5 lives, and he couldn't save them? No, he cannot give up. He doesn't have the right. Somewhere out there, in the city, a killer is walking. He is choosing new victims, waiting for the fog, writing his cursed verses. And Antipov will catch him. He will definitely catch him, even if it takes his whole life. And on January 23rd, 1956 she appeared. She, the 4th one, the Catherine Garden. Evening. Fog. A passerby found the body near the fountain, a woman of about 28, strangled. On her chest, a note. "I give you eternal sleep, where there is neither pain nor worry. Fall asleep, forget the earthly law. I am your last luminous god." Antipov arrived at the scene half an hour after the call, stood over the body, and looked. The same picture, the same handwriting, the same method. He hadn't succeeded. He hadn't caught him. He hadn't prevented it. The victim was identified the next day. Irina Petrova, 28 years old, an accountant at a textile factory, was returning from work. She usually took the tram, but on that day, she decided to walk. The weather was foggy, but warm for January. No one saw her enter the Catherine Garden. No one noticed who was walking behind her. Antipov returned to the office, sat down at the table, placed 4 files in front of him. 4 women, 4 lives cut short by the same hand, and not a single clue. Colonel Drozdov summoned him. "Grigorie, I understand it's a difficult case, but the city is seized by panic. People are afraid to walk through the parks in the evening. Women don't leave their homes after dusk. The regional party committee is calling me, demanding results." "I understand, Comrade Colonel. What do you have?" "Almost nothing. The composite sketch is unclear. The witnesses saw little. The handwriting on the notes is unusual, but the analysis cannot identify the author. The motive is unclear." "Meaning we're treading water?" "For now, yes." Drozdov sighed heavily, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Grigorie, you are the best. I trust you, but I need results. At least some theories, clues, anything I can report upstairs." Antipov was silent. "I have an idea," he finally said. "The killer doesn't choose victims at random. He stalks them, studies them, waits for the right moment. The fog for him isn't just cover, it's part of the ritual. He only kills in foggy weather. And what does that give us? If we intensify the patrols in the parks on foggy evenings, maybe we'll catch him in the act, or at least see him. Remember his face." "All right, I'll give the order. Every foggy evening, extra patrols in all the central parks." Antipov nodded, left the office. The plan was logical, correct, but something inside him said it wasn't enough. The killer is too smart, too cautious. He won't fall into such a simple trap. And Antipov was right. The next 6 months passed without new victims. The patrols walked through the parks every foggy evening, checked all suspects, stopped them, questioned them, noted their details. Result: 0. The city began to calm down. The newspapers wrote, "It seems the maniac has ceased his activity. Maybe he left. Maybe he died. Maybe he simply got scared by the intensified patrols." Antipov didn't believe it. He knew the killer was just waiting. He had hidden, he is observing, studying the new situation, and sooner or later, he will strike again. It happened in August 1956. The fifth victim, the Alexander Garden. Fog, night. A woman of about 30, strangled. Note: "You grew tired of earthly chains. I bring you liberation in the kingdom of eternal and beautiful dreams, where you will find peace." Antipov stood over the body and understood. The killer has changed his tactics. He no longer chooses the parks where the patrols are intensified. He found a new place, less guarded. He is adapting, learning, evolving. And the hunt, which had begun in the autumn of '55, was only just gathering pace. Do you know what is most frightening in this story? Not the crimes, not the cruelty, not the number of victims. The most frightening thing is what was happening to Antipov himself, gradually, imperceptibly, like a slow poison that poisons the body day by day. Towards the end of the year 1956, 1 year after the investigation began, Grigorie Antipov had changed. Elena saw it first. Her husband had become different, silent, distant. Before, he would at least answer questions, talk about work in general terms. Now, only monosyllabic answers. "How's work?" "Working." "Will you have dinner?" "Later." "Maybe we'll go for a walk on the weekend?" "I don't know." He came home late, sometimes at 2 in the morning, sometimes at 3. He would fall onto the bed without undressing, slept fitfully, tossed and turned, muttered something in his sleep. Elena tried to talk. "Grigory, you are destroying yourself with this case. Maybe you should ask Drozdov to give it to someone else. You've already been working for a year without results. It's not your fault." Antipov looked at her and remained silent. How to explain to her? How to tell her that this case had become part of himself? That he sees the faces of these women every night? That he hears their last sighs? 5 women, 5 lives, and he couldn't save them? No, he cannot give up. He doesn't have the right. Somewhere out there, in the city, a killer is walking. He is choosing new victims, waiting for the fog, writing his cursed verses. And Antipov will catch him. He will definitely catch him, even if it takes his whole life. But while he was hunting a ghost in the fog, something was hunting him. The memory losses intensified. Before, it happened rarely, an hour or two that he couldn't remember. He blamed fatigue, stress, exhaustion. Now, more often, much more often. Antipov would wake up in the morning and couldn't remember how he got home. He found notes in his planner, written in his hand, but he didn't remember when he wrote them. He discovered mud on his shoes, although he didn't remember going out on the street. Elena would ask, "Did you come in yesterday around 3? Where were you?" He would answer, "I was working. I was late at the directorate." But he himself wasn't sure. Did he really work, or was he somewhere else? Why doesn't he remember? Once he woke up at 4 in the morning. He was lying on the bed, dressed, scratches on his hands, leaves on his clothes, as if he had been through a park. He got up, looked around. Elena was sleeping nearby. Antipov went to the mirror, looked at himself. A tired face, deep dark circles under his eyes. The gray in his hair had become even more visible. He is 38 years old, but he looks 50. "Who are you?" he asked his reflection. The reflection was silent. He went to the bathroom, washed his hands, washed off the dirt, changed, got back into bed, and couldn't sleep until morning. He lay there and thought, what is happening to me? In the spring of the year 1957, the 6th victim appeared, then the 7th, then the 8th. The killer had quickened his pace. Before, months passed between murders, now weeks. Antipov worked like a man possessed, checking every clue, every testimony, every trifle. He compiled tables, charts of the crimes, looked for a pattern, a regularity, something that would help him predict the next strike. But the killer seemed to be playing with him. changing his tactics, choosing different parks, different times, different victims. The only thing that remained unchanged, the fog, the notes, the method of killing, and the total absence of traces. Colleagues began to whisper behind Antipov's back. The major has lost it. He's obsessed with the case. He doesn't eat properly, doesn't sleep, walks around like a zombie. Drozdov called him in regularly. Grigorie, you need a vacation, at least a week. Rest, regain your strength. Antipov refused. I can't. Every day counts. Grigorie, you're exhausting yourself. I see it. I went through the war. I saw people at their limit. You are at your limit now. I'll manage. It's not a request, it's an order. 2 weeks of leave. Starting tomorrow. I'm temporarily assigning the case to Gromov. Antipov wanted to protest, but he saw the unyielding expression on the colonel's face. Understood. 2 weeks of leave. The spring of the year 1957. Antipov didn't know what to do with himself. He sat at home, looked out the window. Elena tried to distract him, suggested they go to the theater, to an exhibition, or simply for a walk. He agreed. They went. But Grigorie was somewhere far away. In his mind, he was scouring the case details, remembering the victims' faces, looking for the clue he might have missed. Elena looked at him and understood. She had lost her husband. He is here, beside her. But he isn't present. He is still there, in that damned case. One night, on the 4th day of his leave, Antipov woke up from a strange sensation. Cold, damp, the smell of earth and rotten leaves. He opened his eyes. He was standing in the middle of a park. Night, fog. Around him, the trees were black silhouettes in a white haze. How did he get here? He looked at himself. Dressed. Overcoat, boots, gloves on his hands, a flashlight in his pocket. He had left the house alone. At night. He doesn't remember. Antipov looked around. He recognized the place. Terrorized Garden. The very alley where the first victim, Vera Lebedeva, was found. Why was he here? He tried to remember how he left home, how he walked, what he was thinking. Blank. Abyss. Darkness in his memory. Panic began to rise from somewhere in his chest. Cold, sticky. What's wrong with me? He quickly headed for the park exit, almost running, went out into the street, caught a taxi, gave the address in a trembling voice, arrived home, went up to the apartment, opened the door slowly. Elena was sleeping. She hadn't noticed his absence. Antipov undressed, got into bed, stared at the ceiling. What was that? Sleepwalking? But he had never been a sleepwalker. Never. Had stress, exhaustion brought him to hallucinations? Or not? He didn't even want to think about it. But the thought crept in, silent, insistent. What if the memory lapses aren't just fatigue? What if in these moments he does something he doesn't remember later? No. Nonsense. Absurd. He's an investigator. He catches criminals. He doesn't commit crimes. But why then was he standing in the park at night, exactly in the place where the first victim was found? Antipov didn't sleep until morning, and in the morning he returned to work, a day earlier than his leave ended. Drozdov frowned. I was expecting you in 2 weeks. I can't stay at home, I have to work. Grigorie, please, Comrade Colonel, I feel better here, in the middle of the case. Drozdov sighed, waved his hand. Fine. Work. Antipov returned to his office, sat down at his desk, opened the case files. 8 victims from July 1955 to May 1957. Almost 2 years of hunting, and not a single clue. And the memory lapses didn't stop. They became longer, stranger. He began to be afraid of nights. He was afraid of sleep, because he didn't know where he would wake up and what he had done while he slept. But the worst was yet to come, because soon Antipov would find something that would change everything. Journals, written in his own hand, about crimes he didn't remember. Time passed. The year 1958, the 9th victim. The year 1959, the 10th and 11th. The year 1960, the 12th. The crimes continued with frightening regularity. Every few months, a new body in the park, a new note, A new investigation that reached a dead end. Leningrad lived in fear. Women were afraid to go out in the evening. The parks emptied after sunset. Militia patrols walked constantly. But it didn't help. The killer seemed to be invisible. A ghost. He appeared, killed, and disappeared, without leaving a trace. Antipov had become a shadow of his former self. He had turned 42 years old. He looked 60. Gray hair, deep wrinkles. His hands trembled from constant insomnia and nervous tension. Elena left him in the year 1960. She couldn't take it anymore. 5 years of life with a man who no longer existed, who had turned into a machine obsessed with a single goal, who didn't see her, didn't hear her, didn't feel her. She said, "Grigorie, I can't anymore. You chose this case. You chose it over me. I'm leaving." Antipov remained silent. He didn't try to stop her. He understood she was right. He had indeed chosen the case because he couldn't do otherwise. A killer was walking out there somewhere, and as long as he was free, Antipov had no right to a personal life, to happiness, to peace. Elena packed her things and left. Antipov remained alone in the service room he had received after the divorce. A tiny room, a bed, a table, a wardrobe. He didn't need anything else. He worked during the day at the directorate, at night at home, bent over the case files. 13 victims from 1955 to 1966. 11 years of hunting, 11 years of life dedicated to this case. And nothing, not a single clue. Colleagues had stopped talking to him. They avoided him. They considered him cursed. The major who can't solve a case, who wasted more than 10 years and got no results. Drozdov supported him, told him, "Grigorie, you did everything you could. It's not your fault. Sometimes criminals aren't caught. It happens." Antipov didn't agree. It was his fault. He had to find them. He had to prevent these deaths. 13 women, 13 lives because of him. Because he couldn't, he failed, he didn't figure it out. The memory lapses had by then become almost daily. He would lose a few hours every night, wake up in strange places, find mud on himself, scratches, traces of earth, not understanding what was happening. He was afraid to ask the doctors, afraid they would say, "Are you losing your mind?" They would remove him from the case, and he couldn't be removed. He had no right. It was his case, his hunt, his life. And in the spring of 1967, everything changed. April. A foggy evening. The 14th crime. Antipov arrived at the scene. Novodevichy Park. A woman of about 30. Strangled. A note. A familiar picture. He had seen this 13 times. But the experts found a clue. A button, a small metal button in the grass near the body. Dull, dirty, with a characteristic engraving. A militiaman's button from a tunic. Antipov looked at it, then at his tunic, counted the buttons. One was missing. His button at the crime scene. The world around him froze. No, it couldn't be a coincidence. Someone threw it, framed him, but deep down, he knew. He knew it wasn't a coincidence. He knew the memory lapses weren't just fatigue. He knew that at night, when he remembered nothing, something terrible was happening, something he didn't want to know. But now he had to find out, because the truth was already very close and it was more terrifying than any nightmare. You know, there's a moment in life when reality breaks, when everything you believed, everything you built your life on, collapses like a house of cards, and you stand among the ruins and don't understand who you are now. For Grigorie Antipov, such a moment was the April evening of the year 1967. He was standing at the scene of the 14th crime, and looking at the button in the expert's hand, small, metallic, with the characteristic engraving of the militia directorate. His button, Major Antipov. Investigator Gromov's voice sounded cautious. "We need to talk." Antipov raised his gaze, saw his colleagues' faces, tense, suspicious. "They already know, they've already seen. It's not what you think," he said. His voice sounded foreign, distant. "And what do I think?" Gromov approached. "Major, this button is from your tunic. Can you explain how it got to the crime scene?" Antipov looked at his tunic, counted the buttons again. Indeed, one was missing. The second row. Third, from the top. When did he lose it? Where? When did he last wear this tunic? Yesterday morning. He went to work, returned in the evening. The button was in its place, he remembered exactly. He was adjusting his collar in front of the mirror. And then what? A lapse. Darkness in memory. He didn't remember yesterday evening at all. I don't know, Antipov whispered. I don't remember how I lost it. You don't remember? Gromov's voice became harsher. Major, do you understand what this means? He understood. He understood perfectly. It meant he was a suspect in the case he had been leading for 12 years, in the crimes to which he had dedicated his entire life. Absurd, nightmare, impossible, but the button didn't lie. Grigorie Antipov. Gromov spoke formally, according to protocol. Under suspicion of involvement in the crime, you are removed from the case and must follow me to give a statement. Antipov didn't resist. He nodded, headed for the car. Colleagues stepped aside, watched, whispered. The best investigator in the city, the man who hunted a maniac for 12 years, turned out to be a suspect in the same crimes. How was that possible? The interrogation lasted 6 hours. Antipov sat in the same office where he himself had interrogated hundreds of suspects. Now the table separated him from Gromov. Now he was on the other side. Where were you last night? At home, in my room. Can anyone confirm? No. I live alone. What were you doing? Working, studying the case materials. Until what time? I don't remember. Late, maybe until midnight. And after midnight. Pause. Antipov looked at the table. I don't remember. What do you mean you don't remember? I have memory lapses. Lately. Often. Gromov took notes, his face impenetrable. How long has this been going on? A few years ago, after I took over this case. Did you consult doctors? No. Why? I was afraid they would remove me from the investigation. And you continued to work, knowing that something was wrong with you? Antipov was silent. What could he answer? Yes, he continued. Because he couldn't stop. Because this case had become his life. His obsession. His curse. Major Antipov. Gromov put the pen down, looked him straight in the eye. I've known you for many years. I worked under your command. I respect you. But I have to ask a question. Could you have committed these crimes during your moments of memory loss? Silence. The question hung in the air. Heavy. Frightening. Antipov looked at Gromov, then at his hands. Large, strong. Hands that had held weapons, that had restrained criminals. Hands that could strangle. I don't know, he whispered. I really don't know. And that was the plain truth. He didn't know. He didn't remember. He couldn't be sure. Maybe in those moments, when his memory disconnected, he transformed into someone else, into the one he had been searching for all these years. Maybe, by hunting a ghost, he was hunting himself? This thought was unbearable, monstrous, tearing his conscience apart. Grigory. Gromov spoke more gently. Now you have to stay here, in the holding cell, until we figure things out. Do you understand? Antipov nodded. He understood. He was led to a cell, small, clean, a bed, a table, a sink, bars on the window. The door closed. The lock clicked. Antipov sat on the bed, put his head in his hands. 12 years. 12 years he had searched for the killer. 13 dead women, and now the 14th. And all the clues led to him. But he didn't remember. He didn't remember anything. What if it was true? What if during the memory lapses he did this, killed, wrote poems, left notes? What if the killer was him? No, it can't be. He was an investigator. He protected people. He didn't kill them. But then where did the button at the crime scene come from? Where did the scratches on his hands that he found in the morning come from? Where did the mud on his clothes come from? Antipov lay down on the bed, closed his eyes. He had to remember. He absolutely had to remember what happened during those nights, even if the truth turned out to be more frightening than any nightmare. Antipov spent 3 days in the holding cell. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, just thought. He reviewed in his memory all the lapses, all the oddities, all the moments he couldn't explain. The list came out long, frightening. The year 1956. He would wake up in the park at night, not remembering how he got there. The year 1958. He would find notes in his notebook that he didn't remember writing. The handwriting looked like his, but slightly different. The year 1960. Elena said he would leave at night, return towards morning. He didn't remember. The year 1963. He woke up on the Fontanka embankment at 4 in the morning. In his hands, a notebook with some poems. The handwriting was his, but he didn't remember writing the poems. And there were dozens, hundreds of such episodes perhaps. All these years, he had blamed it all on stress, on overwork. He didn't want to admit that something was wrong. He didn't want to see the obvious, and the obvious was frightening. On the fourth day, Gromov came. "Grigorie, we searched your room with a warrant." "I'm sorry, but it was necessary." Antipov nodded. He understood. He would have done the same in Gromov's place. "And we found..." Gromov hesitated. "We found something." He placed a worn suitcase on the table. He opened it. Inside, a stack of notebooks. It was in the wardrobe, in the farthest corner, hidden behind some old clothes. Antipov looked at the notebooks, ordinary school notebooks with graph paper, filled with small handwriting. "I don't remember this suitcase," he whispered. "Look." Gromov opened the first notebook. "Here's the first entry." Antipov took the notebook with trembling hands. He read, August 15th, 1955. Today, it all truly began. The handwriting, his handwriting, a little looser than usual, but recognizable. He read on, page after page, and with every line, the world around him crumbled. They were the descriptions of the crimes, of all 14, detailed, thorough, in the first person. How he stalked the victims, how he chose the places, how he waited for the fog, how he wrote the poems beforehand, sat at home, matched the rhymes, rewrote them several times, and between the lines, thoughts about life, about death, about what happened to him during the blockade. "I don't remember those 19 days of winter, of the 42nd year, at all, as if they were cut out of my life. But the body remembers, the hands remember. They know how to survive when death is all around, how to take another's life to continue your own." Antipov put the notebook down. His hands were trembling so much that the pages rustled. "It's not me," he whispered. "I didn't write this. I couldn't have. The handwriting, the analysis confirmed. It's yours. But I don't remember writing. I don't remember the crimes." "Grigorie," Gromov said gently, cautiously. "There's a term, dissociative identity disorder, when a person splits into multiple personalities. One doesn't know about the existence of the other. It's rare, but it happens, especially after strong psychological trauma. The blockade, the winter of the 42nd year, 19 days of memory loss. What did he do in those days? What terrible thing did he experience that his psyche split? Do you think I have a second personality?" Antipov said this with difficulty. The words got stuck in his throat. "The psychiatrists say, it's possible, a full examination is needed. But the journals, they are written as if the author is watching you, knows you're leading the investigation, and is mocking it." Antipov picked up the next notebook, found an entry. "Grigorie Antipov doesn't know about me. He's leading the case, studying the clues, interrogating witnesses, and I'm watching from the inside. Sometimes I want to laugh. He tries so hard, he's so absorbed in searching for the killer that he doesn't understand he's looking in the mirror. We are one, but separate. I go out at night. He wakes up in the morning and doesn't remember. A convenient system." Antipov closed his eyes tightly. Nausea washed over him. Dizziness. It's impossible. Impossible. But the handwriting was his. The details were those that only the killer knew. And the button from the scene of the 14th crime. All the clues came together into a single picture, frightening, monstrous, shattering to the mind. He was the killer. That night Strangler he had been hunting for 12 years. He was hunting himself and didn't know it. "What? What will happen now?" Antipov asked. His voice sounded foreign, distant. "Psychiatric evaluation. If dissociative identity disorder is confirmed, you will be declared insane. Not prison, but a special hospital. Forced treatment." Not prison sounded almost like a relief, but that didn't change the essence. 14 women were dead because of him, by his hands. Even if he didn't remember, even if it was a second personality, the hands were his, the body was his, the guilt was his. "I want to see the photos," Antipov said suddenly. "What photos?" "Of all the victims. All 14. I must see them." Gromov hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, I'll bring them tomorrow." The next day, Gromov brought a file with photos. 14 women, from the first to the last. Photos from the crime scenes, photos from the morgue, photos from their lives, those they managed to find from relatives. Antipov spread them on the bed, looked at them. Vera Lebedeva, 26 years old, librarian, dreamed of philology. The first. Galina Novikova, 24 years old, nurse, smiling in the photo. The second. Ludmila Solovyova, 32 years old, teacher. 2 children left orphaned. The third. And on. Irina, Marina, Olga, Tatiana, Ekaterina. 14 lives, 14 destinies, cut short by his hands. He looked at their faces and tried to remember at least something, at least a moment, at least a second of what he had done on those nights. Nothing. Just emptiness. Darkness. An abyss. The second personality didn't give him access to these memories. It protected him from the truth that could have broken him. But now the truth was here, in these photos, in the journals, in the button from the crime scene, and it was breaking him slowly, methodically, like torture. Antipov sat on the floor of his cell. Around him, photos. His hands were trembling so much he couldn't pick them up. He looks at these pictures and starts to cry. First quietly, sobbing, then louder, and then he wails, like a child, clutching his head in his hands and rocking back and forth. 12 years he had searched for the killer, swore to find him, dedicated his whole life, lost his wife, his health, his sanity. And the killer had been here all along, inside him, a part of himself. And when he finally learned his name, he couldn't take it anymore. He broke, because that name was Grigorie Antipov. The psychiatric evaluation lasted 3 weeks. The doctors performed tests, hypnosis, long discussions, studied the journals, analyzed his behavior. The diagnosis was unequivocal: dissociative identity disorder, complicated by post-traumatic stress disorder. The roots were in the blockade period, the winter of 1942. Those 19 days that Antipov didn't remember. The psychiatrists explained. In those days, starving, alone in an empty apartment, he did something. Something so terrible that the psyche couldn't withstand it. It split. It created a second personality that bore this sin. And the first personality, the one called Grigorie Antipov, militia major, investigator, continued to live, without knowing. 2 people in one body, one by day, one by night. One caught criminals, the other was the criminal. And only when the clues became too obvious, the barrier between them began to collapse. But there was something else. Something Antipov found out later. Something that made this story even more frightening. In the last notebook, right at the end, there was a short entry, written a few days before the 14th crime. Soon, Grigory will understand. Soon, he will see the truth. And then, I don't know what will happen. He'll kill himself. He'll surrender. But there is one more thing, Elena. She must be the last, the 15th. Then the circle will close. Then we can stop. Elena, his ex-wife, the second personality, was planning to kill her. And Antipov, reading this line, understood. I have to warn her. Immediately, before it's too late. He called the guard. I need to urgently contact Captain Gromov. Now. But it was already too late, because that same night, on May 24th, 1967, the impossible happened. Major Antipov disappeared from the holding cell, and in the morning, in the summer garden, the 17th victim was found. Sometimes the most frightening stories have the quietest endings. Not an explosion, not a catastrophe. Just a man enters a room and says a few words, and the world turns upside down. On May 24th, around 3 in the morning, in the investigation holding cell on Gorokovaya Street, something happened that shouldn't have happened. Guard Petrov was making his rounds, checking the cells through the peephole. He reached cell number 7, where Major Antipov was being held. He looked. Antipov was lying on the bed, writhing, clutching his chest, suffocating. "Guard! Doctor!" Petrov threw the door open, rushed to the detainee. Antipov was gasping. His face had turned white, his lips blue. All the signs of a heart attack. They raised the alarm, called the car. Antipov was taken out on a stretcher into the courtyard, loaded. Guard Petrov sat next to him, the doctor in front with the driver. They set off through the night city. Empty, quiet. The fog was settling on the Neva, white, dense, like on that first night, October, the 55th year, when it all began. The car was driving down Nevsky Prospect. Antipov lay motionless, barely breathing. Guard Petrov watched him, checking his pulse from time to time. They stopped at a traffic light. The red light faded in the fog, and suddenly, Antipov opened his eyes wide, clear. With a sharp movement, he threw off the blanket, opened the car door with a jerk, jumped out. "Stop!" Petrov lunged after him, but Antipov was already running into the fog, fast, like a man who didn't need an ambulance at all. Like a man who had faked a heart attack perfectly, convincingly. He shouted, whistled. The driver jumped out of the cabin. The doctor stood in shock, but the fog had swallowed the fugitive. In a second, he was gone. Grigorie Antipov disappeared into the white veil of nocturnal Leningrad, and the second personality had finally gotten what it wanted. Freedom. The alarm was raised. The description was sent throughout the city. Patrols scoured the streets, checked the train stations, bus stations, the port. They surrounded all the parks. But Antipov was nowhere. He had evaporated like a ghost. Captain Gromov personally led the search. He understood that every minute counted. If the journals told the truth, if the second personality was planning to kill Elena, she had to be found immediately, provided with protection. Elena now lived on Vasilyevsky Island, a small apartment, one room. After the divorce, she had gotten a job as an accountant at a factory. She lived quietly, modestly, hadn't started a new relationship. Sometimes she thought about Grigory, about the man he once was. Before that case, before the obsession, before something broke in him. She didn't yet know he had been arrested, that he was suspected of 14 murders, that in the journals her name was the 15th on the victim list. Gromov came to her at 7 in the morning, knocked. Elena opened in her bathrobe, sleepy, bewildered. "Captain Gromov, criminal investigation. Are you Elena Antipova?" "Yes, what's the problem?" "You need to pack your things, immediately. We will provide protection. You are in danger." "What danger? I don't understand." "Your ex-husband, he—" Gromov hesitated. How to explain it to her? How to tell a woman that the man she had lived with for years might be a serial killer? "He escaped from custody. We have reason to believe he might try to harm you." Elena turned pale, sat down on a chair. Her hands started to tremble. Her mind was in chaos. Grigory, her Grigory, quiet, withdrawn, absorbed in that cursed case, could harm her. How? Why? What happened? Half an hour later, she was taken to a service apartment of the directorate, with round-the-clock security. 2 militiamen at the door. Constant surveillance. Gromov explained. "You are safe. We will find your husband, I promise." But he himself wasn't sure, because Major Antipov had disappeared, dissolved into the city he knew like the back of his hand. In the city where he had spent his whole life, where every street, every courtyard, every basement was known to him. If he didn't want to be found, he wouldn't be found. A day passed, then another. Antipov didn't appear. No trace, no clue. Gromov barely slept. He coordinated the searches, interrogated everyone who might know where Antipov was hiding. Colleagues, former neighbors, distant relatives, nothing. Elena sat in the guarded apartment and looked out the window at the city shrouded in fog. The spring of 1970, warm, damp. The fogs came every night, like then, like in all those years. She thought about Grigory, about how he was at the beginning, when they had just met. Quiet, but attentive. He didn't talk about love, but he was there, reliable, stable. Then he took that case and began to change. Slowly, imperceptibly, as if something inside him was waking up. Something dark, hungry. He stopped being Grigory. He became someone else. She had tried to help him, told him, "Leave this case, it's killing you. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you don't live." He didn't listen, said, "I can't, I promised, I have to find him." And she left, because she understood she had lost him forever. But even after the divorce, even when they hadn't seen each other for years, she sometimes thought of him, hoped he would manage, that he would find that killer, that he would return to a normal life. And now Captain Gromov was telling her, "Your husband has escaped from custody. You are in danger." What happened? What did he do? Gromov hadn't explained in detail, but Elena sensed something terrible, something that had turned everything upside down. On the night of May 26th, she couldn't sleep. She lay there listening to the sounds of the city outside. Rare cars, footsteps of passers-by. Somewhere far away, a ship's horn on the Neva. And suddenly, a tap on the window. Quiet, insistent. Elena froze. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Who could be tapping on the window? The tap repeated. She got up, cautiously approached the window, pulled the curtain aside, and saw him. Grigorie. He was standing on the fire escape, thin, exhausted, clothes dirty, torn, his face gaunt, eyes sunken. But he was looking at her. He recognized her. "Lena," he whispered through the glass. "Open, please." Elena stood motionless. The guard was outside the door. She could scream. They would come running. They would detain him. But something stopped her. It was Grigorie, her Grigorie. Whatever he was now, she had once loved this man. "Lena, I won't hurt you. I promise. Just open. I need to talk to you one last time." Elena slowly opened the window. Grigorie climbed inside, stopped in the middle of the room, swayed on his feet, looked like he was about to fall. "You came to kill me?" Elena asked quietly. Grigorie flinched, looked at his hands. Large, strong, a killer's hands. "No," he whispered. "I came to warn you. You have to leave the city as soon as possible, as far away as possible." "Why?" "Because he wants to find you, to kill you. And I can't stop him. He's stronger, especially at night, especially when it's foggy." Elena looked at her husband, listened as he spoke about himself in the 3rd person, about him, about someone else who lived inside. And suddenly she understood. "It's true," she whispered. "What Gromov says. You are the killer you've been searching for all these years?" Grigorie covered his face with his hands. His shoulders began to tremble. He was crying silently, bitterly. "I didn't know," he whispered through his fingers. 12 years I didn't know. I really thought I was looking for someone else. But it was me. All this time it was me." Elena took a step towards him. She wanted to hug him, to comfort him. But she stopped. This man had killed 14 women. 14, with his own hands. Even if he didn't remember, even if it was a second personality, the hands were his. The guilt was his. "What now?" she asked. "I'm going to surrender." Grigorie lowered his hands. His face was wet with tears. "In the morning, I'm going to the directorate myself. But first I wanted to make sure you're safe, that he won't get to you." Is it you, Grigorie?" "No. He is what was born in the winter of the blockade, when I was starving, when I was doing what isn't spoken of, what is more frightening than death. The psyche couldn't take it, it split. And this part, it lives separately, at night, in the fog." Elena sat on the bed. She looked at her husband, at the man she thought she knew, and it turned out she didn't know him at all. "Leave," Grigorie said. "Please, to another city, under another name. I'll tell them where you are, but only when they lock me up, when I can't anymore, when he can't get to you anymore." "And what if they don't lock you up? What if you escape again?" Grigorie took a straight razor from his pocket, opened it. The blade gleamed in the moonlight. "Then I'll do what I should have done a long time ago." Elena jumped to her feet. "No, don't you dare! 14 women are dead, Lena. 14, because of me. I can't live with this. I mustn't. It's not your fault. You're sick. You need treatment. Guilt always exists. Even when you don't remember, even when you weren't in your right mind. He took a step towards the window. Elena rushed after him. "Where are you going?" "Goodbye, Lena. Thank you for being there when I was still human." And he was gone. He jumped onto the fire escape, descended into the fog. Elena rushed to the door, shouted, "Guard! He was here! Antipov!" The militiaman burst in, ran to the window, leaned out, but below there was only a white veil. Dense, impenetrable fog. Grigorie Antipov had disappeared again. And this time, for good. In the morning, on May 27th at 5:30, a body was found in the summer garden. A passerby stumbled over something in the fog, bent down, saw a woman's hand. The same picture as 12 years ago, almost in detail. A woman of about 30. She lay on her back, hands outstretched, dress arranged, strangled, on her chest a note. But now, there was another body. 10 meters from the woman, a man. He was hanging from the branch of an old oak tree, a rope around his neck. His hands hung limply at his sides. The face was immediately recognized. Major Grigorie Antipov. Captain Gromov arrived at the scene 20 minutes later, stood and looked at the two bodies, the woman and Antipov, the last victim and the last killer. The 17th woman was named Anna Krasavina, 36 years old, a saleswoman at a bookstore. She was returning from the night shift, decided to take a shortcut through the park. She didn't know that death was hiding in the fog. The note on her chest was written in the same calligraphic handwriting. 17, the last number. 17, the end of all roads. "Forgive me, dear victim. I couldn't anymore." The medical examiner determined the woman had been killed around 4 in the morning. Antipov had hanged himself about half an hour later. Enough time to kill, write the note, find a rope, throw the noose. A letter was found in Antipov's pocket, addressed to all concerned. Gromov read it, standing under the same oak tree. His hands were trembling. "I do not ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. 17 women are dead because of me, because of what I became in the winter of the blockade in the 42nd year. I tried to understand what happened in those 19 days of January, February. Those days I don't remember. The doctors tried to restore my memory through hypnosis. It didn't work. The mind defends itself. It doesn't want to remember. But I suspect. In the winter, in 42, I was starving, alone in an empty apartment. My mother had died on January 23rd. They found me on February 11th. 19 days between these dates. A gap in memory. What did I do in those days? How did I survive when people were dying by the hundreds around? I did what some did so as not to die. What isn't spoken of? What is more frightening than death itself? I don't remember exactly. I don't want to remember. But fragments of memories. A body in the basement. The hunger that had stopped being just hunger. Hands that were doing something indescribable. My psyche couldn't take it. It split. It created another man who bore this sin. And I continued to live, without knowing. But he, this second part of me, remembered. He remembered the taste of death. The taste of another's life that prolongs your own. And after the war, years later, when I was already an investigator, a married man, a normal citizen, he would wake up at night, go out into the fog, look for victims, not to eat them. No. The blockade was over, the hunger had passed, but the need to kill remained. The need to feel how another's life is extinguished in your hands. The need to offer them peace, just as I myself had once received peace, eating the flesh of the dead. I know, it's madness. I know, it's a disease. But not knowing does not absolve from guilt. 17 women. Every night I see their faces. I hear their last breath. I feel their throat in my hands. I do not ask for forgiveness. I just want you to know. I remember. Now I remember everything, and I cannot live with this. The 17th was the last. I promised him, the second personality, that if he stopped after her, I would not resist. I would let him do what he wanted. He wanted Elena, the 15th, but I didn't allow it. I warned her. She is safe. Instead, Anna, a random passerby. I don't know what her name was in life. I found out the name only after, from her documents. I apologize. Forgive me. I couldn't stop him. Now it's all over. There will be no more victims, because I am putting an end to this, with my own hand. The blockade broke me in 42. I lived 25 years after that, but in fact I died then, in January 42. All the rest was just an agony, slow, agonizing. Now it's time to finish. To the families of the victims. Forgive me if you can. I cannot forgive myself. To Elena. Thank you for trying to save me. It didn't work, but thank you. To Colonel Drozdov. You were right. I should have been removed from the case back in 56. I was already sick then. Then, maybe, all these deaths wouldn't have happened. I was a monster for 25 years, without knowing it. Now I know. Grigorie Antipov, May 27, 1967. There was no trial. The dead are not judged. Antipov was buried in the cemetery of the psychiatric hospital, a simple cross. No name, just the years of his life. 1918, 1967. 49 years, of which for 12 he hunted himself.